7 years, and he never touched me. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her hands trembling as the memory of their cold marriage pressed down on her chest. The Duke, Alexander Fitzgerald, was at his desk, hunched over papers, his back to her as always. The same indifference she had come to expect, the same distance that had grown between them like an unscalable wall. She knew he had never truly loved her. His heart had been claimed by someone else, and she was just his duty. A marriage of convenience, forced upon them by their families. She had tried, oh how she had tried, to bridge the gap, to make him see her, to make him care. But 7 years had passed, and nothing had changed. Not once had he reached for her. Not once had he spoken to her with the tenderness she had longed for. Tonight was no different, or so she thought. But then he turned. Alexander looked at her, his eyes cold, distant. And then, something shifted. For the first time in years, his gaze softened, and his lips parted. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse, like someone waking from a long sleep. "I need you." The words hit her like a thunderclap. She stood frozen, the weight of those words sinking in. Could it be? Had he really said what she thought he had? Her heart raced, pounding in her chest. The man who had ignored her for 7 years now looked at her, as if he saw her for the first time. He pushed away from the desk, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Please," he whispered, stepping toward her, his hand reaching out, hesitating in the air. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Was this the moment she had waited for? Was this the moment he would finally reach for her, finally acknowledge her as his wife, not just a title? She took a tentative step forward, her eyes locked on his, searching for any sign of deceit. But there was none. Only the raw emotion that had been buried for so long. Alexander stepped closer, his hand now brushing against hers. The touch was tentative, almost like he was afraid of what might happen next. She wanted to pull away, to protect herself from the heartbreak she had endured for so many years, but something in his gaze stopped her. He wasn't the same man who had turned his back on her before. This was a man who had learned the weight of his own mistakes, a man who was finally ready to claim what he had lost. And yet, she hesitated. Could she truly forgive him? Could she trust him after everything? His voice broke through her thoughts, low and urgent. "I've been a fool, Eleanor. I never deserved you." Her heart clenched at his words. The man who had never once shown her affection was now standing before her, vulnerable and remorseful. She could see it in his eyes, the regret, the longing, the desire to make things right. For a moment, time seemed to stretch on forever as they stood there, both of them caught in a moment of uncertainty. Then, without thinking, Eleanor took his hand. "Then prove it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander's eyes darkened with emotion. He stepped closer, his other hand cradling her cheek as he leaned down. The moment was electric. The distance between them vanished as he kissed her, not with the coldness of duty, but with the fire of something real. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her, a warmth she hadn't known in years. She had waited so long for this. And now, finally, she was no longer invisible to him. I was lost in the warmth of his embrace, the kiss lingering between us like a promise. Alexander's hand was steady on my cheek, his touch gentle as if he feared I would break beneath his fingers. For 7 years, I had dreamed of this moment, dreamed of him seeing me, truly seeing me, and finally, he had. His eyes searched mine, raw with emotion, and for the first time, I saw the man I had once married, the man I had hoped would love me. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. His forehead rested against mine, and for a brief moment, I felt like I could breathe again. The walls that had surrounded my heart for so long seemed to crumble, but I could not forget the years of pain, of loneliness, that had built them in the first place. "You start by never letting go," I said softly, my voice shaky. His lips parted as though he wanted to say something, but the words faltered on his tongue. Instead, he kissed me again, this time, not with desperation, but with something deeper, something more real. The kiss deepened, and for the first time, I felt the heat of his desire, not as a duty, but as something genuine. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, as though he feared I might slip away. I could feel his heart beat against mine, strong and steady, and for a moment, I wondered if we could ever return to the people we had been before. But I couldn't dwell on that. Not now. Not when he was holding me as if he truly wanted me, as if he finally saw me for who I was. Eleanor, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I have spent so long denying this. Denying you. I was a fool. His words hit me harder than I expected, the weight of them pressing down on my chest. I had waited so long for him to see me, to hear me, to love me. And now, here he was, offering me something I had once thought was lost forever. I never asked for this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But now that I have it, what do I do with it? Alexander pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine for an answer, as though he was asking for forgiveness. I saw the man who had been broken by his past, the man who had buried his heart so deep he could barely recognize it. But now he was reaching for it. For me. And for the first time in years, I believed in us again. He stepped back, taking my hand in his, and led me to the sofa, his touch still gentle, but filled with a new kind of tenderness. We take it one step at a time, he said, his voice firm yet soft. And we rebuild what was lost. I nodded, my heart beating faster. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Real hope. Not the hollow kind I had been living with for years, but something new. Something real. I want to believe you. I whispered, my voice shaky with emotion. But I need to see it, Alexander. I need to see you try. He nodded, his hand still holding mine. I will, he said simply. And for the first time, I believed him. I could feel his presence beside me, the warmth of his body so close. Yet for so many years, we had both been strangers. But now, in this moment, things felt different. Alexander's hand rested gently on mine, a steady reminder that, for the first time, we were truly here. I looked up at him, searching his eyes for any hint of doubt, but I saw none. He was determined. He had made up his mind, and he would prove to me, to both of us, that this was real. I know I've been distant, he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of his apology. I've spent so long buried in my grief. I didn't see the hurt I caused you. I nodded, the words hitting deeper than I had expected. For so long, I had wished for this, his admission, his acknowledgement. And yet, now that it was here, I felt a wave of hesitation. It's not just your grief, Alexander. I whispered, my voice trembling with vulnerability. It's all the years I spent wondering if you ever cared, wondering if I meant anything to you. His eyes darkened, and he reached for me, his thumb brushing gently over my knuckles as if to soothe the storm within me. You mean everything to me, Eleanor, he said, his voice low and sincere. I failed you. I failed us. But I'm here now, and I won't make the same mistake again. I wanted to believe him, truly I did. But how could I let go of all the years of hurt and anger? How could I trust that this wasn't just another moment of regret that would fade with time? I had to try. For myself, for him, for the life we could still build together. What do we do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His gaze never left mine as he squeezed my hand gently. We start fresh. We take it one day at a time. The simplicity of his words struck me deeply. After everything we had been through, after all the pain, we were starting again. But this time, it was different. There was no distance between us. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time, I felt the weight of his love. The silence between us was no longer uncomfortable. It was filled with the promise of something new, something hopeful. Alexander leaned in, his breath warm against my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt his presence like never before. I could feel the tension in his shoulders, the weight of all the unspoken words, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to hear them. I love you, Eleanor, he murmured, the words almost too soft to hear. I'm sorry for all the years I wasted. But I promise you, I will spend every day making it up to you. His words were everything I had ever wanted to hear. They were the words I had longed for, the words that had been missing for so long. But they weren't just words. They were a promise. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew that, for the first time in years, we were truly beginning something new. A new chapter, a new life. Together. The days that followed were filled with an unfamiliar sense of peace. Alexander and I spent more time together than we had in years. But this time, it was different. There was no silence between us, no distance. Each word he spoke was measured, full of meaning, and I found myself listening to him in a way I had never done before. Our conversations were no longer empty, like they used to be. We shared memories, thoughts, and even fears that had remained buried in the past. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen, heard, and understood. "I don't deserve you, Eleanor," Alexander said one evening, as we sat by the fire, the warmth from the hearth contrasting the cold night outside. His voice was quiet, filled with the weight of his words. "But I want to make things right. I want to be the man you need." I could feel the sincerity in his voice, and it struck me harder than I expected. For years, I had lived with the thought that he would never change, that I would forever be trapped in a marriage where I was invisible. But now, sitting here with him, I saw a glimpse of the man I had married, the man I had once believed in. "You've already started, Alexander," I replied softly, my gaze never leaving his. "But we can't rush this. We have to take our time." He nodded, his hand reaching out to gently take mine in his. His touch was warm, grounding, and for the first time, I didn't pull away. We sat in silence for a while, just holding hands, each of us lost in our thoughts. It was a new beginning, one that neither of us had expected but both needed. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Slowly, but surely, our bond deepened. We went on walks through the estate, spoke about things we had never discussed, and shared moments that felt like the start of something we had both been waiting for. But the healing didn't come without its challenges. There were days when old wounds resurfaced, when the pain of the past threatened to overwhelm us both. Yet, each time, we found a way to face it together. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden, Alexander took my hand and looked at me with a softness in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "Eleanor," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I've spent so long thinking I didn't deserve your love. But now, I know that I've been given a second chance, and I won't waste it." His words settled into my heart like a gentle balm, and I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to crumble. In that moment, I knew that we weren't just rebuilding our marriage. We were creating something stronger, something deeper. Alexander had already shown me more than I ever expected. His actions, his words, his willingness to change. These were the things that mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in us. The future was uncertain, but I no longer feared it. Together, we would face whatever came our way. And as I looked at him, I knew that, no matter what, we would never be the same. We were stronger. We were healed. And we were ready to embrace the love we had almost lost. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Alexander and I began to build something real, something that had been absent in our lives for so long. We took things slow, learning to trust one another again, piece by piece. I never thought I would see the day when our silence would be replaced by laughter, or when our home would once again feel like a sanctuary instead of a place of painful memories. But here we were, side by side, rediscovering each other. One evening, as we sat together on the balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Alexander turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "Eleanor," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I don't think I've ever truly known what it meant to love someone until now." I felt a wave of emotion rush over me at his words, but I stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch between us. For so long, I had wondered if this moment would ever come, if he would ever see me for who I was, not just as his wife, but as someone deserving of love. "I've been selfish," he continued, his gaze never leaving mine. "I spent so much time thinking about my own grief, my own pain, that I forgot to see your pain. And for that, I am sorry." His apology wasn't just words. It was the weight of 7 years of regret, of realization, of change. I could see it in his eyes, the sincerity in every syllable. But I knew we still had a long way to go. "You've shown me more than I ever expected, Alexander," I said quietly, my heart full. "But healing doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, patience, and trust." He nodded, his hand reaching for mine, his touch as gentle as it had ever been. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I'm willing to give you all the time you need. And more." The promise in his words was something I could hold on to. For the first time in years, I felt as though we were walking the same path, no longer bound by the past, but looking forward to a future we would create together. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything we had been through. The pain, the distance, the silence. And then I thought about how far we had come in such a short time. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real, and it was ours. The next morning, We woke up to the sound of birds singing outside, the sun streaming through the windows. Alexander was already up, standing by the window, his eyes focused on the garden below. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly as I walked in. I smiled, my heart swelling with a love I hadn't known in years. "I'm glad you are too," I replied, my voice full of warmth. He turned to me, his eyes full of affection, and I realized that, in this moment, everything had changed. We were no longer the broken versions of ourselves from before. We were starting over. And this time, we would make it work. We had to. The days that followed were filled with small moments of joy, of rediscovery. We learned new things about each other, things we had never known before. And with each day, the bond between us grew stronger, more unbreakable. I no longer feared the past, nor the future. With Alexander by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came our way. The days continued to flow by, each one filled with moments that I had once thought impossible. As we spent more time together, I began to see a side of Alexander the first had never known before. He was thoughtful, attentive, and, for the first time in years, he was present. It was a slow, steady change, but it was enough. One evening, as we sat together on the terrace, watching the sky turn pink with the setting sun, Alexander spoke again, his voice softer than usual. "Eleanor," he began, "I used to think that I could live without love, that it wasn't necessary for me to feel it, to give it." I turned to face him, surprised by the depth in his voice. "And now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "Now I know I was wrong," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I've spent so long denying myself the one thing that could have healed me. You." My heart skipped a beat at his words, but I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I see you now, Eleanor. I see you as you've always been, strong, patient, kind. You've been here for me, even when I didn't deserve it." His words touched me deeply, and I could feel the warmth of his sincerity surrounding me. "I didn't want to admit that I was broken," he continued, his hand reaching for mine. "But the truth is, I've been hiding from my own heart. From you. But I'm not hiding anymore." I looked down at his hand, resting gently in mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of all the years we had spent apart. But it wasn't painful anymore. It was freeing. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice full of uncertainty, but also hope. He smiled at me, the expression warm and genuine. "We build," he said simply. "We build something real. Something we both deserve." And in that moment, I realized he was right. We had both been living in the shadows of the past, but now it was time to step into the light. Together. The days that followed were filled with new discoveries and quiet moments of happiness. We took walks around the estate, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes walking side by side, just enjoying each other's company. We spent hours talking, sharing stories of our childhoods, of the things that had shaped us into who we were. It wasn't always easy. We had our moments of doubt, moments where the past seemed to resurface, but we faced them together. We talked. We listened. We worked through it all. Slowly, we were rebuilding not just our marriage, but ourselves. One afternoon, Alexander came to me with a small, worn notebook in his hands. "I found this in the attic," he said, handing it to me. "It's from when we first met. I wrote down everything I admired about you, everything that made me fall in love with you in the first place." I opened the notebook, my heart fluttering as I read the words he had written years ago. "You've always been my light, Eleanor," he said quietly, as I read through the pages. I just lost sight of it for a while. His words hit me harder than I expected. In that moment, I realized that the man sitting beside me, the man who had once seemed so distant, had always loved me. He had just been lost, trapped in his own grief. And now, we were finding our way back to each other. Slowly, but surely, we were healing. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be easy, but as long as we were together, I knew we could face anything. I looked at Alexander, my heart full of love, and smiled. "I'm glad you found your way back to me," I said softly. He smiled back, his eyes filled with the same love. "I'm never leaving again," he whispered. And for the first time, I truly believed him. As the weeks passed, the changes in our relationship became undeniable. The distance that had once separated Alexander and me was slowly but surely closing, and with each new day, we learned how to be together in ways we had never imagined. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the past resurfaced, threatening to tear us apart. But each time, we faced it together, and each time, we grew stronger. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the estate, Alexander and I stood side by side in the garden. The air was crisp, the scent of blooming flowers filling the space between us. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Do you ever wonder how we got here? How everything changed?" I turned to him, the question hanging in the air. "I think about it all the time," I admitted, my voice soft. "But I also know that what matters is where we are now, and where we're going." He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'm grateful for where we are now. For you." His words, simple yet filled with so much meaning, brought a warmth to my chest. "I never thought I could feel like this again," he continued, his eyes searching mine. "But I do, and I won't let it slip away." I reached out, gently taking his hand in mine, and in that moment, I knew he was speaking from his heart. The weight of all the years, all the pain, seemed to disappear with a single touch. "We won't let it slip away," I replied, my voice full of determination. "We've come this far, and we'll keep moving forward." The silence that followed was comforting, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled with words because everything that needed to be said was already understood. We spent the rest of the evening in quiet companionship, walking through the garden, side by side. The past still lingered, but it no longer had the power to control us. We had found a new beginning, one that was built on the foundation of trust, forgiveness, and love. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come. It felt like a lifetime ago when we were two strangers living under the same roof, each of us trapped in our own world. But now, we were partners, equals. And for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. "I love you, Eleanor," Alexander whispered into the quiet of the night, his voice full of sincerity. "I love you too, Alexander," I replied, my heart swelling with the words I had longed to say. As I closed my eyes, I realized that our journey wasn't over. There was still so much ahead of us, but I no longer feared it. Together, we could face anything. And with that thought, I drifted off to sleep, knowing that we had found our way back to each other, and that nothing could ever tear us apart again. The days turned into weeks, and as the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of our lives. We had both grown, not just as individuals, but as partners. The air around the estate had grown warmer with each passing day, mirroring the warmth that had blossomed between us. It was no longer the cold, distant place it once was. Our conversations became easier, filled with shared laughter, plans for the future, and even small moments of lighthearted teasing. But there were still times when the past would creep in, like an uninvited guest. On one such evening, I found myself sitting in the library, my eyes tracing the familiar walls of the room where I had once sat alone, waiting for a love that never came. I ran my fingers over the edge of the desk, feeling the cool wood beneath my fingertips. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander's voice broke through the quiet, his presence warming the room. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his eyes soft, though I could tell he had noticed the distant look in mine. "Just memories," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Of the way things used to be." He walked over to where I sat, his steps measured but sure. "I know," he said quietly, sitting down beside me. "I think about it too, but I also think about how far we've come." His hand found mine, his fingers interlacing with mine in a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. "We've built something real, Eleanor," he said, his voice steady, full of conviction, "and I won't take it for granted." I squeezed his hand, the weight of his words settling into my heart. "Neither will I," I replied, my voice soft, but resolute. "We've both made mistakes, but we've learned, haven't we? We've learned what it means to be together." "Yes," he agreed, his thumb brushing gently over the back of my hand. "And it's the most important thing I've learned." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the world outside fading away. The past still lingered between us, but it no longer held the power to define us. Together, we had found a way to move forward, to build something better, stronger. As the days grew longer, so did our bond. We spent more time together, traveling to nearby villages, exploring the countryside, and sometimes just sitting in the garden, basking in the quiet comfort of each other's presence. I had once feared that we would never overcome the distance between us, but now, I couldn't imagine my life without him. There were still challenges ahead, still things we needed to work through, but for the first time in a long time, I felt certain about the future. And as I looked at Alexander, his smile genuine and full of love, I knew that together, we could face whatever came our way. We've come a long way, I said, my voice filled with emotion. But there's so much more ahead of us. And I'll be with you every step of the way, he replied, his eyes unwavering. That's a promise. I leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. In that moment, I knew that we were exactly where we were meant to be, and no matter what happened, we would face it together, side by side. The weeks passed, and though the wounds of the past had not completely healed, there was a new sense of peace between Alexander and me. We spent our days together, not just as a couple, but as friends, rediscovering the parts of each other that had long been lost. There was something almost magical in the way we had learned to speak to each other again, to listen, to understand. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. One morning, as the sun filtered through the windows of our room, I woke to find Alexander already up, standing by the window, looking out over the vast expanse of the estate. I watched him for a moment. The man I had once feared I'd never truly know, now someone I could count on, someone I could rely on. "Good morning," I said, my voice still thick with sleep. He turned to me, his eyes soft, his lips curling into a small smile. "Good morning," he replied, walking over to the bed and sitting beside me. "You were sleeping so peacefully, I didn't want to wake you." I smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "I'm glad you didn't. I needed that rest." He looked at me then, as though searching for something in my expression, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "How are you really feeling?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I paused, considering his question. How did I feel? It was a simple question, but the answer was complex. "I'm okay," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm not perfect, but I'm here. With you." Alexander squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "We've come so far, Eleanor," he said softly, his voice full of both awe and gratitude. "I never thought we would get here, but now." He paused, looking at me with such tenderness that my heart fluttered. "Now, I know we're stronger than ever." I felt the tears welling in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. It was enough to just be in this moment with him, to know that we had overcome so much together. "We've made it this far," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And we'll keep going." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Together," he said firmly. We stayed like that for a while, our hands still intertwined, the world outside moving on, but in that moment, it felt like time had stopped. We had found something beautiful in each other again. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the way he held me, as if I was the only thing that mattered. The rest of the world faded into the background, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. As we got ready for the day, I felt a sense of purpose, a renewed sense of hope. There would be challenges, of course. There always were, but I no longer feared them. Together, we could face anything. And as I walked beside him, my hand in his, I knew that no matter what came next, we would face it as a team. Alexander had shown me a new kind of love, one built on understanding, patience, and trust. It was the kind of love that could weather any storm. And as long as we held on to each other, I knew we would never let go. As the days turned into months, we found ourselves not just surviving, but truly living again. The love that had once seemed lost was now something I could feel every day, in the smallest moments, in the quiet exchanges between us. Alexander and I had built something beautiful from the ruins of our past. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real, and it was ours. One afternoon, as we walked through the gardens, the sound of birds singing filled the air, and the sun bathed everything in a soft golden light. I looked over at Alexander, his hand brushing against mine as we strolled side by side. His face, once filled with the weight of so many years of regret, now held a contented calm that made my heart swell with love. "Eleanor," he said softly, breaking the peaceful silence, "I've been thinking." I turned to him, curiosity filling my gaze. "About what?" He smiled, the warmth in his eyes making my breath catch. "About how much we've changed. About how far we've come." I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I know. It feels like we're not the same people we were before. He stopped walking for a moment, turning to face me. We're not. And that's what makes all of this so worth it. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You've shown me more than I ever expected, Alexander, I said, my voice full of emotion. More than I ever thought possible. He stepped closer, his hand resting gently on my cheek as he looked at me with such tenderness that it took my breath away. You deserve it all, Eleanor, he whispered, his voice thick with affection. You deserve everything I have to give. My heart fluttered at his words, and I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes for a brief moment. I never thought this would be possible, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I never thought I would feel this way again. And now you do, he replied softly, his thumb brushing over my cheek. And so do I. We stood there for a moment, the world around us fading away, as if time itself had slowed to let us savor the beauty of what we had found in each other. It had taken us years to get here, to overcome the obstacles that had once felt insurmountable, but now, as I stood beside Alexander, I knew that everything we had been through was worth it. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I no longer feared it. Together, we would face whatever came our way. As we continued our walk through the garden, I realized that this was the life I had always dreamed of. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale, but it was real, and it was ours to build, together. Alexander had shown me what it meant to love again, to trust again, and to believe in the beauty of second chances. And for that, I was grateful beyond words. No matter what happens, he said, his voice steady and full of love, we'll face it together. I promise you that. I smiled, my heart full of a love I had almost lost. I believe you, I said softly, knowing in that moment that nothing could tear us apart. Together, we had found something worth fighting for, something that would carry us through whatever challenges the future held. And that was enough. It had been several months since Alexander and I had found our footing again. Each day brought new experiences, new lessons, and the ever-growing comfort of knowing that we were truly building a life together. The house, once so quiet and filled with the echoes of what had been, now buzzed with life, and the laughter we shared filled the air. It was a beautiful thing to witness, the transformation of a home that had once been a place of sorrow into a sanctuary of joy. One morning, as the golden light of dawn streamed through the windows, I found myself standing in the garden, my hands gently tending to the flowers that Alexander had insisted we plant together. He had always loved the idea of a garden, a place of growth and renewal, and now it felt like the perfect metaphor for our relationship. You always seem to find peace out here. Alexander's voice startled me, and I turned to see him walking toward me, a smile on his face. I think it's because this place is a reflection of us, I said, wiping my hands on the garden apron. We've grown here, just like these flowers. His smile deepened as he approached, and he reached out to gently touch the petal of one of the blooms. It's a beautiful sight, he said softly. And just like our love, it took time and care to grow. I stepped closer to him, feeling the warmth of his presence wrap around me like a protective embrace. You're right, I whispered. We've worked hard for this, for us. And it's worth every moment. Alexander looked at me, his eyes soft yet filled with the deep intensity of his love. I never thought I'd find happiness like this again, he said, his voice filled with emotion. But with you, I have more than I could have ever dreamed of. I reached out, taking his hand in mine, feeling the steady pulse beneath his skin. And I never thought I could love someone so completely. I replied, my heart swelling with the truth of my words. But now I know that I do. He stepped closer, his other hand lifting to gently tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. We've both come so far, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But the journey isn't over. We have so much more to share, so many more memories to make. I smiled up at him, my heart full. I can't wait for all of it, I said, my voice steady with certainty. Because as long as we're together, I know we can face anything. Alexander leaned down, his lips brushing against my forehead in a gesture of affection so tender it took my breath away. Together, he repeated, as though affirming a vow that had already been made. The world around us seemed to fade as we stood there in the quiet garden, a moment of peace in the life we had created. There was still so much ahead, but now, with Alexander by my side, I felt ready for anything. The love we had found was not just a fleeting thing. It was a foundation, one we would continue to build on, together, for the rest of our lives. As the seasons continued to change, so did the way Alexander and I navigated our life together. Each day brought new challenges, yes, but also new moments of joy. It was strange, in a way, to look back on the days when our marriage was a cold and distant thing. Now, everything felt different. Every smile, every touch, every quiet evening spent together felt like a gift. One afternoon, as we sat in the drawing room, I watched Alexander as he read through a letter from the estate manager. His brow furrowed in concentration, but when he looked up at me, his expression softened. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said, his voice calm, but filled with a quiet seriousness. I looked at him, sensing the shift in his tone. "What is it?" I asked, setting down the book I had been reading. He set the letter aside and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said slowly, as if carefully weighing each word. "About us, about everything we've been through. I know we've both been through a lot of pain, but I also know that we're stronger because of it." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. "I agree," I said softly. "We've come so far, Alexander. Farther than I ever thought we would." He smiled, but there was a glint of something more in his eyes. "And I think it's time we truly move forward. Together." My heart skipped a beat at his words, a sense of uncertainty creeping in. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me with such intensity, his gaze never wavering. "I think it's time we make a real commitment to each other," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "No more doubts, no more fears. Just us, moving forward into the future, no matter what it holds." I felt a lump form in my throat as his words sank in. This was what we had been building toward, wasn't it? A future together, free from the shadows of the past. But could I truly let go of all the fear, all the hesitation that still lingered in my heart? I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but all I saw was sincerity and hope. Slowly, I nodded, my heart steadying with each beat. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm ready. Ready to move forward with you, Alexander. For real this time." His face lit up with a smile, and I could see the relief in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out and took my hand in his, holding it with such tenderness that I felt my heart swell with love. "We've both worked so hard to get here," he continued. "But now, we can build something even greater together. A future filled with love, trust, and happiness." And in that moment, I knew that this was the beginning of something new, something we had both fought for. A future together. And as Alexander held my hand, his touch warm and steady, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. Together, we could face anything, and I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it as one. The months that followed were filled with quiet moments and new beginnings. As Alexander and I continued to build our life together, I realized that the journey we had taken was not just about love, but about trust, healing, and growth. We had both learned so much about each other, about ourselves, and about what it meant to truly live, not just exist. The estate was flourishing once again, not just in its beauty, but in the life that seemed to radiate from every corner. It was as if the very land had healed along with us. We spent countless days working together, whether it was in the garden, taking care of the estate, or simply sitting in the library, sharing thoughts and ideas. It was in these simple moments that I truly felt the depth of what we had created. Alexander had become more than just a husband. He was my partner, my equal. And in return, I had become someone he could rely on, someone he could trust. It wasn't always easy, of course. We still had our disagreements, our moments of doubt. But they were no longer the defining moments of our relationship. They were just bumps in the road, ones we could overcome together. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, we found ourselves standing on the terrace, looking out over the vast estate. The quiet of the evening was soothing, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Alexander turned to me, his gaze soft yet filled with an intensity one had come to recognize as his love for me. "I never thought I would find peace like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've given me a life I never thought I deserved." My heart swelled at his words, and I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "I never thought I could love again," I replied, my voice steady but filled with emotion. But here we are. He smiled, the warmth of his expression filling me with a sense of calm. We've built something beautiful, Eleanor, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. And I will cherish it forever. I could feel the weight of his words, the sincerity in them. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. We had built something truly beautiful, something no one could take away from us. It wasn't just the estate or the life we had built around us. It was our love, our trust, and our commitment to one another. It was the small moments, the quiet evenings, the shared glances that spoke volumes. We had found something that was worth holding on to, something that would endure. And in that moment, as we stood together, hand in hand, I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together, side by side. Our love had become the foundation of everything, and with that foundation, there was nothing we couldn't overcome. Together, I said softly, squeezing his hand. Always, he replied, his voice full of the promise we had made to each other. And as we stood there, watching the sunset together, I knew in my heart that this was just the beginning of our journey, one we would walk together for the rest of our lives.